What if the oldest non-African ancestry in the Horn of Africa didn't come from Arabia, but from forgotten migration that predates agriculture, religion, and even the rise of written language? Somali oral tradition speaks proudly of noble origins, ancestors tied to Arabia, lineages descended from the Prophet's world, crossing the sea in the 11th century, planting Arab blood into African soil. But DNA says otherwise, because when scientists sequenced nearly 1 million genetic markers across the Somali genome, they didn't find a 1,000-year-old Arabian imprint. They found something far more ancient, a West Eurasian genetic signature that entered the Horn at least 23,000 years ago. It's older than the pyramids, older than Sumer, older than milk drinking, wheat growing, or the concept of cities. This signal, called the Ethio-Somali component, isn't found in modern Arabs. It's not shared with Persians. It doesn't even match North African Berbers. It diverged from all other Eurasian lineages before the Ice Age ended, and yet it makes up nearly 40% of Somali DNA today. The other 60%? Deep East African ancestry, rooted in the Horn for over 100,000 years. That's the contradiction. A population that holds two of the world's most ancient genetic currents, African and non-African, yet remains one of the most genetically homogeneous groups on the continent. And the real shock? There's no trace of the Arabian lactase mutation, the gene that allows adults to digest milk, a marker common across the Arabian Peninsula for over 4,000 years. It's missing. Gone. So what happens when DNA dismantles the very foundation of cultural memory? Who were the people that carried this 23,000-year-old signature across deserts and seas, long before any map, any mosque, any king? And how did their blood become the blueprint of Somali identity? Because if the answer isn't Arabia, then what forgotten world lies beneath the Somali genome? That forgotten world has a name now. Scientists call it the Ethio-Somali component, but it's not just a name. It's a time capsule. Hidden inside nearly 40% of Somali DNA is a Eurasian signature that doesn't belong to any living population. It doesn't trace to Arabs, or Persians, or Berbers. It doesn't belong to any empire, kingdom, or known civilization. This signal broke off from other Eurasian lineages around 23,000 years ago, long before humans even farmed. That date matters, because it pushes Somali non-African ancestry far deeper than most people ever imagined. This wasn't migration during the rise of Islam, or even the Bronze Age. This was before the Neolithic, before pottery, before the first grains of wheat were sown. The people behind this signal were likely cousins of the Natufians, hunter-gatherers who lived in what is now Israel, Palestine, and southern Lebanon during the Epipaleolithic period. Archaeologists have uncovered their burial sites near caves in the Levant. Skulls, tools, beads. But until recently, we didn't know their blood reached across the sea. Yet it did. Genetic research, including the groundbreaking work by Hodgson et al., 2014, and Lazaridis et al., 2016, shows this Ethio-Somali ancestry likely arrived through the Sinai Peninsula, moving south into Africa as early as 12,000 to 23,000 years ago, during the tail end of the last ice age. This wasn't a trickle. It was a tide, a full wave of humans, carrying unknown languages, unknown rituals, who merged with ancient East African hunter-gatherers and vanished into time. But their genes stayed. And here's the twist. This component peaks not in Arabs or Levantines today, but in Cushitic-speaking groups like the Somali, Aramo, Afar, and Beja, which means the Horn of Africa wasn't just a recipient of ancient Eurasian DNA. It became its final stronghold. The oldest Eurasian signal still surviving in modern humans lives strongest in Somalis. But this mysterious bloodline didn't arrive alone, because after this ancient wave faded into the earth, another one came, louder, larger, and carrying seeds. A new kind of migration, a backflow of farmers, and with them came barley, blades, and blood. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't myth. This was a continental return, a powerful genetic and cultural reversal from the lands humanity once left behind. Around 1200 BCE, a massive population wave surged out of the Near East, reversing the old, out of Africa story. This time, it wasn't about survival. It was about civilization. These were Neolithic farmers, carrying everything their world had become: domesticated grains, settled villages, herding strategies, and a reshaped genome. And they didn't trickle in. They arrived in force. Scientists call it the Eurasian backflow, and it's carved into the DNA of modern Somali populations. Studies show that up to 30% of Somali ancestry today comes from this event, a profound genetic shift that aligns with one of the most dramatic transformations in African prehistory. What's staggering is the match between genes and archaeology. Near Eastern crops, wheat, barley, lentils, appear in East African soil right around this time. Excavations at Butana, Sudan, Lanet and Hyrax Hill, Kenya, and Tulu Bor, Ethiopia, show clear transitions in farming tools and burial customs. The newcomers didn't just change how people ate, they changed how they lived, how they buried their dead, how they organized power. And the genetic match? It's exact. These farmers carried ancestry from the Levantine Neolithic population, the same people who once settled the Pekian cave in Israel and Catalhoyuk in Anatolia. They brought mitochondrial lineages like R0A and HV1 and Y-DNA subclades that mirror ancient Levantine and Anatolian genomes sequenced in studies from 2014 to 2020. They also brought disease resistance, metabolic adaptations, and the genetic architecture for larger, more complex communities. This wasn't just a gene flow. It was a cultural fusion. But there's something they didn't overwrite. Because beneath the fresh layer of farmer DNA, scientists found something older, stronger, more rooted. It wasn't from the Levant. It wasn't from Anatolia. It came from men and women whose lineages never left the African Horn. And they've left a genetic signature still pulsing inside the Somali genome today. A legacy carved in silence. That silence lives in the chromosomes. Because beneath the grand migrations, the barley seeds, the Neolithic tools, there's a quieter story. One that doesn't come from the mouth. It comes from the blood. And it begins with the Y chromosome. More than 70% of Somali men carry a marker called E1B1B, specifically the subclade EM78, and within that, the branch known as EV32. This isn't just any lineage. EM78 originated in Northeast Africa around 19,000 years ago. And EV32, it's almost exclusive to the Horn. It arrived here at least 6,000 years ago, and it stayed. Not by accident, by design. These were the fathers of herders, the early pastoralists who moved with cattle long before the arrival of foreign seeds. Their descendants still remember this through clan names, oral histories, even livestock traditions, all of it, echoing an indigenous foundation. But while the paternal story is deeply East African, the maternal story speaks in another accent. Over 60% of Somali mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line, comes from sub-Saharan haplogroups like L0A1D, L2A1H, and L3F. But the other 39% is Eurasian. These lineages, M1, HV1, R0A, aren't recent. They trace back 20,000 to 30,000 years, to ancient movements out of the Near East and into Africa. It's a gendered fingerprint. Ancient East African fathers, Eurasian mothers, a blend that predates Islam, Christianity, even the first temples in Sumer. These weren't invaders, they were co-survivors, mixing, moving, adapting, forming the cultural spine of what would later be called Somali. And the balance held. This male-female ancestry split is unlike anything seen in surrounding populations. It suggests something unique happened in the Horn, a fusion of worlds, stabilized over thousands of years by endogamy, tradition, and geography. But for decades, this story stayed hidden, unreachable, unprovable, until one skeleton changed everything. Because in a cave, high in the Ethiopian mountains, buried beneath rock and time, a man was found. He had never seen the sea, never seen a plow. And yet, inside his skull, was the key to unraveling everything. In 2011, in the cool highlands of the Gamo region in southwestern Ethiopia, archaeologists stumbled upon a cave. Quiet, remote, empty. But inside it, buried beneath layers of dust and volcanic sediment, they found him mota. Not a king, not a warrior, just a man. But what he carried no pharaoh ever could. In 2015, scientists extracted DNA from his petrous bone, the densest bone in the human body. Against all odds, it was intact. For the first time in African history, a complete ancient genome had been sequenced. Published in Science, it changed everything. Mota had lived around 4,500 years ago, during a period before metal, before written script, before the Eurasian farmer wave had reshaped the horn, and his DNA confirmed something radical. There was no trace of West Eurasian ancestry. None. Not even a shadow of the Ethio-Somali component. Not one fragment of the Neolithic Levantine gene flow that modern Somalis carry. His genome was entirely African, untouched by the backflow migrations that would arrive 500 to 1,000 years later. That means everything scientists found in Somali DNA, the Eurasian lineages, the farming genes, the cultural reshaping, happened after Mota. His body became the control sample, the clean slate, the genetic before picture of the Horn of Africa. It's why today, any talk of back migration, any claim about Levantine ancestry entering the Horn, is measured against him. And it wasn't just about ancestry. Mota's genome revealed no signs of lactose tolerance, no adaptation to Neolithic farming life, no Eurasian pharmacogenetic markers. He was genetically aligned with hunter-gatherers, resilient, rooted, and local. His very existence proved a rupture, a before and after moment. And yet, while his DNA stopped there, Somali DNA did not. Because after Mota, that Eurasian backflow didn't just stop in the Horn. It rippled. It moved. It flowed into places no one expected, carried by migrations, by memory, and by a people who became the genetic bridge of an entire continent. And yet, despite all this mixing, one mystery remains. Why are Somalis still so genetically similar? To understand that, you have to go back. Back to a time when the Sahara wasn't sand. 5,000 years ago, the heart of North Africa was green. Forest rivers, lakes large enough to sail across, an ecosystem that stretched from the Red Sea to the Atlantic. It was called the African Humid Period, and it turned the Sahara into a living highway. It didn't just move animals. It moved people, cultures, and DNA. Because long after Mota, and after the Eurasian backflow reshaped the Horn, something astonishing happened. That new ancestry didn't stay in place. It moved westward, hidden inside a chain reaction no one could have predicted. The Bantu expansion, starting around 1000 BCE. Waves of Bantu-speaking agriculturalists migrated from the grass fields of Cameroon, sweeping through Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa. But here's the twist. They weren't genetically isolated. They had already mixed with horn-based populations who carried ancient Eurasian signatures. And so, unknowingly, the Bantu carried those foreign genes into parts of Africa that had never seen a single Eurasian footstep. Today, when researchers analyze the Yoruba of Nigeria or the Mbuti pygmies of the Congo, they find something impossible. 6 to 7% Eurasian DNA. No direct contact. No evidence of Levantine migration into those forests. The source: back-migrated Eurasian genes from East African populations, closest in structure to the Somali genome. This is backed by genomic modeling and studies like Pagani et al., 2015, and Busby et al., 2016. A genetic bridge, forged in the Horn, carried all the way to the equator. So even though Somalis never set foot in West Africa, their ancestral imprint did. It flowed silently, like water through cracked stone, through trade, marriage, language, and the great reshuffling of African peoples. But here's the paradox. While Somali DNA helped reshape Africa's genetic map, itself stayed the same, tightly clustered, genetically uniform, no signs of recent mixing, almost untouched. And that is the contradiction. How can a people so involved in Africa's genetic evolution remain so internally preserved? To answer that, scientists turn to the very code of Somali identity, the clan system. An oral framework, yes, but also a genetic architecture. Modern genome-wide analyses, like those led by Ali et al., 2020, found something rare. When Somali samples were run through admixture and PCA, expecting the usual spread seen in other admixed African populations, the data pushed back. No scatter, just a tight, distinct cluster, genetically locked, despite millennia of known gene flow from the Levant, Arabia, and East Africa. It wasn't what they expected. It was anomaly by discipline. The secret? Admixture happened early. Then, endogamy did the rest. For at least 2,000 years, Somali clans practiced controlled marriage, reinforcing bloodlines with precision, intermarriage within subclans, oral genealogies that remembered 30 fathers back. Identity wasn't flexible, it was enforced. And with it the DNA. Even today, you can trace it in the blood. Over 60% of Somalis are blood type O, and a staggering 88% are Rh positive. Extremely high uniformity across regions. The immune system itself, measured through HLA typing, mirrors this. Nearly identical allele frequencies across clan divisions, from the coast of Xyla to the interior of Galkayo. Y chromosomal studies? Same story. E1b1b, especially the EV32 sublineage, dominates Somali paternal lines. But in certain clans, like Dir and Isa, you also find high levels of T1a haplogroups, a marker tied to ancient Levantine ancestry, preserved like a fossil in family lines. This is what happens when a population controls not just who enters, but who stays. It's not just history, it's design. But stability has consequences. Because when immune systems are built on ancient blueprints, and those blueprints rarely change, they can struggle when faced with new diseases, new pathogens, new pressures, and deep inside Somali genomes are vulnerabilities passed down with the same pride as lineage. Legacy with a cost. But where did those immune signatures come from? To find out, we need to go back. Back to the first cattle. Back to the first herders. Back to the people who shaped the horn, not with cities, but with livestock. It turns out, the same genes that once protected Somali ancestors from famine, infection, and disease may now be putting their descendants at risk. In 2020, a rare autoimmune marker appeared again and again in Somali diabetic patients. Scientists in Mogadishu and Helsinki cross-checked the data, and there it was, HLA-DRB1*03:01, present in over 93% of Somalis diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, a gene rooted in immune system regulation, and now tangled in a silent epidemic. But this is only the surface. Somali DNA also carries pharmacogenetic variants that directly affect how modern drugs behave. Variants like UGT1A4*2, found in over 14% of tested Somali samples, can delay the metabolism of common seizure and anxiety medications. Another, FCORC1ASP36-TIR, at 8% prevalence, alters the body's sensitivity to blood thinners like warfarin, a drug used worldwide but especially dangerous in patients with this mutation. These aren't side effects. They're genetic landmines. When Somali refugees and diaspora communities arrived in Minnesota, Finland, and the UK, Western medicine wasn't ready. Clinical trials had never tested these ancient variants. Healthcare systems assumed uniform response. But Somali DNA, forged by pastoralist life, centuries of endogamy, and environmental adaptation, responded differently. In 2018, Finnish medical researchers reported unexplained drug toxicity in Somali patients. The dosages were standard. The results were not. Hospitalizations, adverse reactions, confusion. The genome had spoken, and it wasn't using the language of Western pharmacology. But this story doesn't end with vulnerability, because what harms in one era may protect in another. The very immune traits causing metabolic problems today may have once shielded Somalis from East African pathogens, arid climate plagues, or even malaria variants still poorly understood. This isn't just a health issue. It's an evolutionary echo, an immune system shaped by migration, locked by isolation, and now speaking across time. But what if these signatures, these ancient variants, weren't born in the Horn at all? What if Somali DNA holds whispers from a world far beyond the savannah? A world of ships, salt winds, and distant monsoon coasts. The first clue wasn't found in the Horn. It surfaced in the genome of a child in Yemen, and then again in a family in Mogadishu. A maternal lineage scientists couldn't explain. It didn't come from Africa, not from Arabia, not even from the Levant. It came from Southeast Asia. In 2019, A mitochondrial DNA study shocked researchers. In both Somali and Southern Arabian samples, they found traces of Austronesian mtDNA, a marker tied to populations from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. It was like finding Pacific whispers in the middle of the Horn. But how? The answer lies in the Indian Ocean, the world's oldest superhighway. For over 2,000 years, that ocean carried more than trade. It carried women, sailors, settlers, entire families, moving with monsoons, arriving not as armies, but as currents. Some came by way of Madagascar, where Malayo-Polynesian-speaking peoples arrived as early as 500 CE, merging with African Bantu and leaving deep Austronesian footprints. And some went further. Somali ports like Xyla, Berbera, and Mogadishu weren't isolated trade posts. They were cosmopolitan gateways. Before the 19th century, Indonesian and Malay sailors were documented crossing into East African waters, drawn by spice routes, ivory markets, and the Swahili coast's growing power. But these weren't just trading encounters. They were human ones. The mtDNA shows it, passed only through mothers. That means women made the journey. Women who gave birth in Somali homes. Women whose daughters and their daughters passed on genetic threads that now sleep quietly inside Somali mitochondrial maps. Austronesian ancestry in Somali DNA isn't dominant, but it's real. It's old, and it reshapes how we think about this region. Because now the Somali maternal line, once thought to be African and West Asian alone, carries 3 continents inside its code. But for every answer that science gives, one question still haunts this genetic odyssey. Because beneath all this, beneath the driftwood, the trade winds, the cattle bones, the royal lineages, one question still burns in the soul of Somali identity. Who was the first to call this land home? To answer that, we need to trace not just blood, but speech. Somali is not an isolate. It's not a lone survivor of some forgotten tongue. It is part of Cushitic, a branch of the Afroasiatic language family, one of the oldest and most enduring linguistic trees on Earth. A family that also includes Arabic, Hebrew, Amharic, Hausa, and the whispers of priests buried in ancient Egyptian tombs. But where did it begin? That question has split scholars for over a century. Some say the Levant, where Afroasiatic Semitic roots first appeared in texts from Akkad and Dugarit around 2000 BC. Others argue for Northeast Africa, where oral traditions stretch further than writing ever could. The DNA offers a strange answer, because the Ethio-Somali component, uniquely strong among Cushitic speakers, shows deep ties to pre-pottery Levantine populations, dating back to 23,000 years ago. But it also shows long-term local evolution, a hybrid signal, born of bidirectional flow between the Red Sea and the Rift Valley. Linguists now suspect that Proto-Cushitic emerged not in one place, but along a corridor of movement where cattle, culture, and language flowed together like braided rivers. A frontier, not a border. And while the genes speak in code, the rocks tell stories. In Las Gil, Somaliland, red ochre cattle still stand frozen on cave walls, painted over 5,000 years ago, with horns curved like questions into time. In Dambalin, hunter-herders dance in scenes that echo with linguistic cadence. The imagery matches what scholars call the pastoral Neolithic, a time of expansion, where both herds and words moved with intention. But even as we trace roots through bones, tongues, and mitochondrial strands, something still escapes the frame. Because no matter how far we look back, through scripts or syntax, one final thread resists. It doesn't come from rock, or blood, or trade. It comes from the rituals, still alive. From the songs no outsider can translate, from the bones no archaeologist dares move. And it's there, in those unbroken traditions, that the final key may still lie waiting. Because when the records vanish, when the stones go silent, and the genomes blur into statistical clouds, only one thing remains. Memory, carried not on scrolls, but on the backs of camels. In poems, in rituals passed from mother to daughter, whispered, not written. Remembered, not archived. The Somali story was never meant to be a straight line. It's a mosaic, jagged, scorched, flooded, forged by droughts, cattle raids, and migrations that left no maps. But somehow, across 23,000 years of genetic reshuffling, One thing endured: identity. Not imposed, not borrowed, but preserved. In nomadic cycles, where children still memorize lineage back 30 generations. In oral genealogies so precise, even genetics struggles to disagree. In the Sayer, a legal system older than most nations, where clan loyalty governs justice, and justice carries memory. Today, when a Somali child is born in Hargeisa, or Jigjiga, or even Helsinki, they inherit more than DNA. They inherit a blueprint. One foot in Africa, one echo from Eurasia, a legacy drawn not from one continent, but from the meeting point of both. A genome that reflects not just survival, but strategy, adaptation, endurance. Because while empires collapsed and borders carved new lies into maps, Somali resilience continued, like a buried river beneath desert rock. Unseen, unstoppable. So when you ask, where do Somalis come from? There's no one answer. There's only this. A man in a cave, untouched by Eurasian genes. A mother from Indonesia who birthed a son by the horn. A father carrying Levantine markers through pastoral plains. And a child born today, who still carries all three in silence. The bones do not lie. They whisper. And the story they tell is only just beginning. Next time, we follow that whisper to the Ethiopian highlands, where another ghost waits. One even older and even more mysterious.